Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Impact Talks. Today we have Greg Jacobson with us. He's an ER doctor turned startup founder. Greg, I'm super excited to have you on. Please tell the people what you do and where you're from.
Yeah, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called KaiNexus, and I also practice emergency medicine on the side, and I am living in Austin, Texas.
So much fascinating things when we first talked a couple of weeks ago now. I remember you telling me that you still practice medicine, and your startup is not very much a startup. It's like a scale up at this point. I think you started it in 2010, right?
That's right. That's right.
Could you tell me more about the initial thoughts, why you would leave such a secure job that I can imagine you're still passionate about because you're still doing it? Why go into tech entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I don't think the decision was as clear as you mention it. I think with any decision, you make tiny little decisions that take you in areas that interest you. And so that's basically what happened with me, where initially I finished my residency in 2004, and my mentor handed me a book called Kaizen by Mizaki Amai. And if you are not familiar with Kaizen, it's a Japanese term that means continuous improvement, and it's a book that's often credited with introducing much of the Western world about these principles. Interestingly, if you dive into the history more, many of these principles started back in the Western world in the 30s and 40s and 50s. But regardless, a lot of them have been really procured and refined by the most popular company that does them is Toyota. And so I read the book, and honestly, love it. By page 7, I was completely just blown away that there was a doctrine, that there was a discipline, that there was this huge body of knowledge that existed that you could apply to any system. And in case you're not aware, the American healthcare system is completely broken, and
Yeah, we're pretty aware.
and so it was a perfect system to kind of realize that there isn't a magic silver bullet, right? I mean, innovation is not going to solve America's healthcare crisis. We are, perhaps arguably one of the most inventive countries out there with regard to medical advancements and medical devices. And so really what's going to solve healthcare is a whole bunch of, really what I call boring improvement work. It's just, kind of in the weeds, lots of small little improvements. And so that's what I decided to do in our emergency department. I thought, oh, well, we could just, teach some of these principles to the residents. It could be part of their residency training, and we could just start solving problems in the emergency department. And so that was kind of the first decision, right? I didn't sit there thinking, oh, I'm an ER doctor and I'm going to become a tech startup. It was just, I got really interested in process improvement and applying it to the emergency department. And one thing led to another, and then the nurses got involved and the rest of the physicians got involved. And we realized that if we were going to try to collect ideas from frontline staff, from the doctors, from the transporters, from the nurses, from the techs, we were going to need some kind of technology to do it. I was initially trying to literally do it, if you can believe it, in email. And so, someone would email me an idea and I would try to manage it in folders and get the right people. And it was a cluster. It was just absolutely, completely unsustainable and not transparent. And you didn't know what was going on. And so the idea was, okay, well, if we could come up with something, and we're talking 2005 now. So this was really at the infancy of when the internet became two-way, when the infancy of when we were utilizing applications online versus just kind of an information source. So it took a while, but we developed something that that looks like a Google form now that you can build in probably just 5 or 10 minutes, and it helped collect ideas. And then over a several year period, we built something that you would probably build like on an Access database now, and you could see the ideas and kind of the status and who was working on them. And we're like in 2006 through 8 at this point. And so you can see like the second decision was like, oh, well, let's get involved in kind of building some technology that can help with this. And then after doing that for 2-3 years, it became really obvious that building software was really difficult, and building software that was really going to help solve the problem was going to be really challenging and couldn't be done as a side project in an academic emergency department. And so that's when I kind of took the jump and decided, okay, I mean, if I was going to make an impact, hence the name of the talks, if I was going to make an impact, I really needed to do it in a real way. It couldn't be just some side project. And so, we got permission and kind of licensed things out of Vanderbilt, where I was, and one thing led to another, and then that was kind of the inception. It was tons of tiny little decisions, but probably 3 major kind of decisions that I went from kind of graduating as a resident to deciding to do a startup, and a whole bunch of stupidity while I was at it.
We're definitely going to cover that part. I want to do it chronologically though, so I want to cover the principles that you read and the ones that you learned from the most. But I think the second question I have is maybe a bit shorter. So you were talking about it took a while to develop. Who was developing this? I'm assuming you're not a developer. So how were you even developing this? And how you said it took a while. What's a while back in those days when you were doing it?
I mean, it probably took us several months to get something that looked like the Google form. Well, let me take that back. Let's say several weeks. And then it took probably 6 to 9 months to develop the first version, if you will, of a website where you can go in and kind of interact with an idea. And to answer the who, I was granted about a quarter of the time of the AV guy in the department who was interested in developing web-based programs. And so it was kind of a side interest / project of his. It's something that literally with the technologies we have today could be built in an afternoon. That's kind of giving you the scale of the rudimentariness of what we built. And then we just iterated. And then at one point I showed some of the code to a good college buddy, a lifelong friend who kind of went down the business route. Like I went down the medical route, he went down the business route and got involved in coding from a business solution standpoint, not like a developer standpoint, but and so he was like, well, what are you doing here? I understand the code, but what are you trying to accomplish? And one thing led to another, and then we started to explore, well, what could this look like as enterprise software? And could you even, build enterprise software on the web, which interestingly enough, we just made the assumption that you could, even though that was, not a given back then.
I know for a fact there are some people listening that have a job, maybe have developed something within their job and are trying to make that switch. I've never had that conversation. Obviously, I've never had a proper boss. So could you please go into detail as to how that conversation even starts and how it ends?
Every academic institution will have a technology policy. And so really the first part of that is to understand what that policy is, and to kind of abide by that policy. So when I realized there was going to be an opportunity to build a company on that, I went to my chairman and basically said, hey, I want to spend some of my time outside of my academic appointment. And that kind of started a chain process with working with the technology office. I think different technology offices will have different appetites to work out what the founders would consider equitable and sustainable business models. And so ultimately, from what I think should have been a several-hour conversation, it turned into a 3-year conversation to ultimately pen something that was good enough to go raise money with, and ultimately that was revised about 3-4 years ago, once it became apparent that agreement was going to inhibit kind of the future growth of the company. And so I think you're going to find that there's some academic institutions that are kind of at the forefront of this, and you're going to find that other academic institutions are a little bit slower, and you'll just have to kind of figure out what place that you're in. And you'll also need to understand what is the paradigm that they're mostly used to working with, which a lot of these academic institutions are used to working with scientists that have a lab, and that lab is being funded, at least operationally, in large part by the academic location, by the organization, and then that scientist will go get grants, and then patents will get created. And so, like, the sweet spot for these institutions will be patenting a molecule that will lead to a drug, that will generate revenue for the university. And kind of as with anything, I think the universities were a little bit slow to the game, let's say 20, 30 years ago. So the pendulum swung. We had something that was very non-standard, so it was very difficult to fit in. We were trying to kind of fit a square into a round hole, so to speak, and so it was difficult. It's not the most interesting part of this conversation in my mind, but we're at a place now where we're in a place that's that agreement is no longer inhibiting what we need to do, and we're very happy with that all being in the rear view. Is that a nice kind of way to
so quickly about the co-founder? So that developer guy and your buddy, were those your co-founders then that you talked
So
with?
yeah, the buddy is the developer guy. So he his name is Matt Palulis, and he was ironically this is not the first company that Matt and I founded, interestingly enough. Back in college, between, I don't know, one summer, I made the observation that everyone was throwing away all of their dorm room carpets. And I was like, wait a minute, if we could just go get these carpets and clean them, we could sell them for a fraction of the price that people were buying these brand new carpets at the beginning of the year. And so by the time we kind of had the idea, and then we had the storage, and we ended up doing that for I think our senior year, and I don't know, we made $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 doing that. So that was really the first time that Matt and I worked together, and we also know each other for, I mean, now more than half my life. So the trust is so intense and so deep, and our personalities are we overlap in many ways, but we're also polar opposites in many ways. So I'm kind of the idea risk taker. He's more of the kind of thoughtful, methodical portion, and I think we overlap in kind of understanding and having a very similar approach from the finance side of things. And so we're like a yin and a yang, and there is no question in my mind that he wouldn't have been able to do this without me, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without him. And so that's what we hear. We hear constantly that most startups, not all, but most startups are more successful if they have 2, 3, and then it seems like from what I've seen, when you get more than 3, kind of the success rate starts dropping off. So, but I think that has been a phenomenal relationship, and has never wavered over over a decade of working together. We are there's never been any discord. So
how did you construct the initial agreement with such a product, with your friend? Because we had the I think it was national secretary for SMEs in Argentina, and he used to be a lawyer, a couple of episodes back, and he was like telling me this entire story of, the most important part, best advice I can give you is that initial agreement with your co-founder. And he started explaining all these complex things of like vested interest and everything.
We had a really complex algorithm that we did. So everyone will want to get their pen and paper out. He did half and I did half, and that was it. It was as simple as that.
Nothing with vested interest, or if you leave me in 1 year.
No, we didn't. In hindsight, we broke so many rules that I've now learned about. That's why I think if you just, for one, by the time that we actually formalized it, we had been talking on nights and weekends for so long that it wouldn't have made very much sense for us to do any vesting. And we had known each other for so long, and we had given each other the commitment to do this. And so, to me, that's more important than anything. Now, I think if you were just meeting someone, or you didn't know someone so well, I think a typical a 4-year vesting type of situation would make a lot of sense. Now we had some initial conversations very, very early on. Well, how much time am I going to spend, and how much time are you going to spend? And we tried to kind of come up with something. And then at the end of the day, it was 50-50, and that was that. We tried to do some complex things. At one point, there was someone else that came in that was helping us fundraise, that introduced some complexity based on how much you fundraise. You could get some equity based on that. If you can just do 50-50, that's great. I think the most important thing is that you trust the person, and that if they're not the person you're going to call when you're in jail, not the first person you're going to call, then you probably should give pause and say, is this really the right person? And if you don't have the benefit and the fortune that him and I had, then yeah, I think getting some more complexity to mitigate that risk is probably time well spent. And I'm sure that there's just some standard things you could grab online. I'm blanking on which organization.
I think Y Combinator has
Y Combinator. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. They've done a lot of none of that stuff existed back when we were thinking through this. I would try to spend as little time with that type of stuff as possible. So if Y Combinator has some reasonable agreements, just go with that.
And they're free as well. You can just download it.
Yep. You're gonna solve much more complicated issues. So you only have so much bandwidth and so many brain cells.
True. So I want to shift back to that first question I had half an hour later. But the first question about, you got that book, those principles that pretty much changed your life or the way you look at things. Can you go a little bit more detailed into this book? I've never heard of it. What were the main takeaways? What was it talking about? Maybe some examples about Toyota, you said.
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, you have heard of some of the offshoots of these business principles, primarily agile software development. Its founding roots originate in much of the principles that were initially developed in Lean, which this kind of fast iteration, put the customer at the center of the equation, and then just do cycles. In process improvement, we call them PDSA cycles, plan, do, study, act cycles, or PDCA cycles, plan, do, check, act. But back when he initially wrote the book, the term Lean didn't exist, and the term Kaizen is kind of a subset in the big Lean framework, if you want to try to kind of organize these in your head.
Well, what's the book called again? What's the book called again?
It's called Kaizen. It's written by Mizaki Amai, and the subtitle is something like "The Key to Japan's Competitive Success" or something. And it's a gray book with red font, and and you can pick it up for like $1 used on whatever place you get used books. So So some of these principles are things like non-value added steps. So if you can remove things that you do in a process that aren't adding value to your customer, then remove those. No idea is too small. Is another one of the core principles. And so there's a whole bunch of different principles, but they all really come down to this intense belief that the worker is the expert in what they do. And so if you can empower the worker to change and improve their workspace and their work environment, then they'll do that. And you can read Daniel Pink's book Drive to understand a lot of the kind of behavioral science behind intrinsic motivation and the principles of why these other business principles work if they're done in a disciplined way. But that's kind of a little bit of the premise of if that makes sense. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. Like this was a great example I'll use a couple of emergency department examples. One is when a person has an eye complaint and they get brought back into the eye room. The chance that an ER doctor is going to want the visual acuity test, the test where they look at the E and what letters at 20 feet away, the chance that they're going to want that test is 100%, right? So instead of bringing the patient back to the room, just have the triage nurse or the tech or whoever's going to bring them from the triage room into their room, just go by the eye chart and just jot down the visual acuity. So when the ER doctor goes in and evaluates, they don't have to write an order that says visual acuity and then leave, and that person has to go get the visual acuity and then come back. I mean, that's just a great example of something small. Another great example is I can remember being in a trauma and a person needed a chest tube to save their life. They had air outside the lung and inside the chest wall that was basically collapsing their lung, right? In the movies, you see the people put the pin in the chest and they go, shh, and then all of a sudden they come alive, right? So the pin is a temporary solution. The permanent treatment for that ultimately is to put a larger tube that will allow the lung to heal over the next several days. So so we're in this trauma, right? It's a stressful situation. Person needs a chest tube, and you go to the the trauma cart, and there's no chest tube. And so the person has to go from there, go to the central supply, which is down the hall. In this case, the person was not there. They were stocking. This is a supply room that might have 4,000 things. So you either know where the chest tubes are or you don't know where the chest tubes are. So it just gives you an idea of well, wait a minute. So the value add step here is putting the chest tube in the patient. The non-value added stuff is all of the looking around for the chest tube, right? So if you can remove all that non-value added steps, then you are just focusing on when you can add value, whether it's value to your customer or whether it's value to your patient. I think you get the idea.
So were you able to save the guy?
Yeah, in this case we were. Yeah, the person that ran there happened to know where it was. But
okay,
it's a great example. Yeah, it's a great example of fixing the process that led to there not being a chest tube. That's just not sexy. There's not going to be an article written up about it. There's not going to be any high-fiving. No one's going to send out the big email to everybody. But that's the type of stuff that really moves the needle. Whether you're in healthcare or whether you're in business, it's how Toyota went from being a company that produced awful cars that no one wanted to drive to being a company that produced intensely high quality, very inexpensive cars that totally dominated the market and kind of caught America blindsided.
So you're saying that these principles from the book pretty much motivated you to start changing, like at least in some ways, the American healthcare system. Some people, especially if you're looking from Europe and comparing like the systems that we have here to what's happening in America and how inefficient things are, it almost feels like it's too far gone, that you either just completely change it or like it, like nothing will happen. How come you decided that like small things can really shift the needle? Because I'm just looking as an example. Obviously, I'm not in the American healthcare system. I'm just looking from the outside. The number one thing that pops up in my mind is the cost of the medicine, which is apparently a negotiated price that happens with insurances and everything. And the medicine might be $5, but then it's like $5,000 on the insurance paper. So how do you even like start helping change stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's impractical to say, oh, we're just going to scrap healthcare and start over. Healthcare is in most industrialized countries somewhere between 10 to in the U.S. almost 18% of the GDP, and so people need healthcare today. So you can't like say we're gonna just turn everything off and then start rebuilding it and spend 10 years rebuilding it. So there is no question that the solution for probably all problems in every healthcare system in the world, but specifically in the US, I'll speak to, is going to be a mixture of policy changes, of business model changes, of leadership changes. So there's going to be innovative things that are going to occur. There's going to be large scale projects that are going to occur, but the neglect or us being blind to the vast majority of the potential for the improvement of the healthcare system is really sitting at the front line. I mean, if you can't talk to a nurse, a doctor, a tech, and ask them, hey, today what made your day inefficient, or what was frustrating to you, and they will just give you 3 to 5 things like, if you could just fix this, and this, then that would have made my day great. And all of those things are probably legitimately need to be fixed. And so Motorola did a lot of work back in the 80s. Actually, Alan Robinson's book, The Idea-Led Organization, has several chapters where he dives into that. And they found that 80% of the improvement potential of an organization is sitting on the front line. So it also means that 20% is sitting in management or senior leadership, and typically management and senior leadership just focus on that 20%. So if we can focus and we kind of unlock the 80%, that's when you can maximize the potential of a system, an organization, hospital, medical practice, healthcare in totality.
So it almost sounds, I really like that you took that spin on it, because it almost sounds like a business that's about to go bankrupt, and then some business coach comes in, changes, like pretty much goes on the front lines, finds out what's happening, and then just changes a couple, like those 80% things, and suddenly the company feels completely different. And so you're looking at the healthcare system that way then.
Yeah, and I would say that the business coach is coming in and not making those changes. The business coach is coming in and teaching people, specifically mid-level management, hey, if you were to develop a system in which people were empowered to fix their own problems, they would do that. So that's the focus. So it's actually healthcare folks, it's actually patients themselves that are going to have to roll up their sleeve. It's going to take patients having patience and empathy and realizing that it's a broken system, that they're going to need to advocate for themselves. They're going to need to participate in the improvement of the system. But obviously the biggest partner there is going to be the workers. I mean, it's going to be the people that are providing the care that's going to do that. The principles would specifically state that you couldn't hire a consultant to come in and fix the problems themselves, because they don't know how every place is a little bit different. I mean, I probably worked at 12 medical centers over the last 20 years, and there are themes that are recurrent, but the specific solutions and or many of the specific problems are sometimes floor dependent, let alone department dependent or organization dependent or hospital dependent. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you then take what you just said and like you project it to today, what do you guys do now to pretty much further that, and what have you done?
you mean as a company?
Yeah, as a company, what have you done to further that mission?
Yeah. So initially we started out in healthcare, and our first customers were in healthcare, and that was just because our marketing was healthcare related, and I'm an ER doctor, and so where did we start with? We started with all my connections and everyone I knew, and hey, will you listen? And so by about so we founded the company in 2009. We raised money in 2010. We started building the product. We hired a single developer, and then Matt was helping out on the side. And we slapped enough code together by the end of 2010 to have a beta product. We found about 3 or 4 different places that used it and banged on it and gave us feedback. We probably did new versions, sometimes multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a month. And by the end of 2011, we got to a point where we just said, well, if you want to use it, it's going to cost money. And someone was like, okay, cool, I'll write you a check for that. And we're like, oh my God, that's great. and then we continued down that path, and people kept reaching out to us and say, hey, Greg, I don't understand. I mean, they didn't say Greg because they were kind of doing it through the website, but you get the point. I don't understand why you're marketing to healthcare, and that's all you're talking about. These are automation and manufacturing principles that you're applying to healthcare, and you guys are doing this in such an interesting way to connect everyone in an organization to have a seat at the improvement table, if you will. And so why can't we use this in our manufacturing organization or our finance organization? And so we did a mini pivot, essentially. I mean, after really thinking hard about it, we took a look at the product and we're like, okay, well, what would it take to make it industry agnostic? And we changed our marketing to be industry agnostic. And it took only about a month worth of development work to kind of rip out all the healthcare references and make all those references configurable to whatever industry you're in. And now we're 60% non-healthcare. So we're mostly a non-healthcare company now than a healthcare company. And I mean, quite frankly, we were just following the money. And if we wouldn't have done that, I'm convinced we would have failed as a company, because healthcare is broken. And so the sales cycles and the time, and the number of healthcare organizations that are deeply committed to continuous improvement and lean at a level that's beyond kind of superficial commitment. Like, oh yeah, we have a continuous improvement department. And then you look at it and there's like 1 or 2 people that are, very underfunded and, don't have any kind of real backing in the company. And so that was the biggest iteration. And then, over the last 10 years, we've learned a ton about, well, what does it mean to be an organization that does continuous improvement? How do all of those things kind of fit in together? And so we've learned that everything is driven from the leadership. Like if you do not have leadership that's committed, now whether that's the leadership of a department or a factory or the whole organization, you have to have committed leadership. This isn't a grassroots effort that is going to. We just haven't seen that that's going to make it, and then you have to have a methodology. That's what we've realized. You have to have a very clear way. If I have an idea, if I want to do a project, that it's very spelled out at the organization that, okay, you're going to do it in this way. We've noticed that the more simple you can make that methodology, the higher your success rate. And And then you are inevitably going to use technology. Some people say, "Oh, we don't need technology to do this," and then, of course, they start sending emails or use Excel spreadsheets, or even use pen and paper. I mean, pen and paper is technology, right? I mean, didn't exist 500 years ago. Plus, you get what I'm saying. And so what we've just realized is that if you use technology that's optimized to help with your methodology and with promoting the right leadership behaviors, then all of a sudden you can create this culture of continuous improvement. And so to answer your question directly, we've kind of started with this bottom up. I like to use the word bottom up. It's really kind of frontline driven observations for low cost, low risk improvements, kind of a Kaizen minded system. And then we realize that organizations that are doing this work are also working on projects, kind of more top down or larger in scope, multidisciplinary. And so now we help people manage those. They're managing and visualizing KPIs or certain data. So we're helping to manage those. And then we also now help manage incidents, whether they're safety incidents or quality incidents. So we're helping to manage those. And then you have kind of this a reporting framework that helps to gain insights into all these things. And so that has taken a lot of time to develop a lot of software and make it all highly configurable. So you'd be amazed. I mean, our developer actually last week told us a little bit that he's like, we don't have one product. We have 100 products that are built on one platform because literally every customer is utilizing the software in quite different ways. So
that was a question that popped up when obviously I was looking into the company. What is it exactly then? Like, how do people actually use the software? Could you also for the listeners that are not watching the video but really listening, what can they imagine with your software? You sign up and what's happening? Is it like a project management tool or something?
Yeah, so imagine kind of project management, task management, idea management, KPI visualization, all blended together. So for a person that knows software, I would say imagine there's elements that remind you of Jira. So in Jira, it's a ticket. Well, in KaiNexus, it's an item. In Jira, you can configure your ticket to be what you want. Well, you can do kind of a similar thing. You can have as many different kind of items as you want. Maybe you have an idea or an opportunity for improvement, or you kind of name it. People have all these different naming conventions of what they want to call whatever a person. So a person will kind of pick up their phone and type in like, oh, I just noticed that this carpet people always trip on, and we've had three customers fall in this. We should do something with this carpet. They could snap a picture, put it in, and so or people are doing these really kind of heavy problem solving methodologies. Are you familiar with A3 or DMAIC? There's also PDSA is another. So there are these. This book that I'm referring to kind of delves into it, but there's just huge discipline of work, all related to problem solving, and all related to kind of either managing how do you get rid of waste in a system, how do you get rid of defects in a system. So there's also like a little bit of an employee engagement component to it. So there are boards in the system that are completely configurable that kind of help optimize workflows. People will run meetings on it. Hey, what are the things we're working on? And they'll create a board that's optimized to run that meeting. But I think it's in those elements, and then it is highly optimized for our people. And I say that our people are CI geeks. I mean, that's who we are. We're continuous improvement geeks, and that's who we are. That's who we love, and that's who we develop software for. And they haven't had their own platform, and so now they do.
How does a company look like now, 10 years later? How many employees? What's your day-to-day like?
Sure. Fascinating question. So in many ways it's been 10 years, but in many ways really the company started in 2014. Prior to 2014, you would have looked at us and realized that it was two founders that for a long period of time weren't taking a salary. We somehow managed to get some revenue, and we had a piece of technology that was, if you really looked under the hood, it was duct tape and twine, and it was not scalable at all. And in 2014, we raised our second seed round, and it allowed us to hire some real professional development talent, and some professional sales talent, and some raw talent. So our first three hires were Jeff Roussel, who is now our Chief Revenue Officer, who led our sales efforts. Adam Hamid, who is our Chief Architect, and then Maggie Millard, who initially was kind of helped me out part-time, and then when we could hire full-time, she did support, implementation, marketing, blah blah blah, a whole bunch of different things. And as she took off hats, it was she became our director of marketing. And 7 years later, she is wicked good. I mean, wicked good, and has become a senior leader in the company. And so, and I'm sure you've talked about this before, but I think it's a great time to remind people that with your first 10 hires, you just can't make a mistake. I mean, you have to nail your first 10 hires. And some of that's just going to be luck. And some of that's going to be that you've developed a skill to find good people. And I always say it's better to be lucky than to be good. And we lucked out on our first 10 hires. And basically they're all still with us. And
what do you mean you lucked out? What were you doing? Usually when people say they luck out, especially on this podcast, we go deeper, and it's usually not exactly luck. So what did you do to allow luck to come in? My question, that's kind of my question.
Sure. Yeah. And I think sometimes when I say it's better to be lucky to be good, I'm playing with that a little bit. Obviously we must have figured something out, but for us to be conceited and think that we couldn't have redone it and had a different outcome, shame on us. It's funny. In preparing for this, I listened to a few of the other interviews, just to kind of see the style of how the conversation was going to go, and I realized, because there are very few startups that are successful, right? I mean, the vast majority of startups fail. And so I was thinking, why is that the case? And I realized that in order to start a startup, you have to be, of course, this was at 5 o'clock in the morning when I was thinking about it, when I was working out, listening. You have to be conceited. You have to be a little foolish, dumb, I can't even remember the third thing I thought of, but you get the idea, right? But as soon as you take the plunge to start, you have to be humble, and you have to be empathetic, and you have to listen, and you have to really pay attention. And I think it's the inability from people to switch and to be so convinced of something and to have such passion for something that they want to, change their life. But then as soon as they start out, to immediately recognize the signs when maybe they were wrong. And if they really believe in where they're going, they will pick up on those cues and start modifying their plan immediately. And so really the first kind of 10 hires was, we hired a lot for talent.
What were you looking exactly? What was how did you define talent? Were you looking at their CVs, past accomplishments?
No, raw talent. We hired our second developers right out of college, and he just became a rock star. just a gut feel. I think that's one of the things that being an emergency medicine doctor, you meet tons of people, and you have to, within 30 seconds, a minute, assess somebody, figure out what's going on, and start inferring what kind of person this is, because you're about to be advising about some pretty intimate and pretty important decisions on their behalf. And so, we hired another person in our first, I'm thinking of like our single digit employees, right out of a 9-month internship. We hired somebody who kind of had a finance background, and he's just a smart guy that I started having beers with every few months, and we started talking about startups. And then all of a sudden, we needed we just needed someone smart that could figure it out. And he had never been a customer success person, but I was like, he'll figure it out. And so I don't know if I can answer that. I don't think there's a formula. You gotta we spend a lot of time interviewing. People go through a lot of interviews here. I feel sorry for them, but we've had an insane high revenue. We've had an insane high retention rate because of it. But then that kind of 10 through 20 was the big transition point, I think, in probably every startup, but in ours, but because you can kind of make a mistake, if that makes sense. And even if it's not a mistake, you're not able to interact daily with 20 different people. And so all of a sudden, it was a time when I realized we lost some hires during that time. Some, I would argue, we couldn't have predicted, and some, I would argue, if we say we weren't a part of it, then shame on us for not realizing that we contributed to it. And that's when, I think, by the time you have 20 employees, you've got to start thinking, how am I going to scale the DNA of the company? Like, what is our DNA? Who are we as people joining together as an organism? I think very biologically, because I'm a physician and that's what I studied. But I mean, ultimately, a company is an organism that's all interworking, and the better that organism can work together and be more aligned, the better the company's going to run. And so now we're at about 25, 26, and we kind of froze hiring during the COVID time, and we kind of knocked it out of the park last year. And so we have all this cooped up capital, and so we're trying to hire. But we'll be a 35-40 person company by the end of this year and into 2022. So that's kind of where we're at as a company.
So you're gonna double in the next 6 months, almost double.
We'll go up, let's say 50% in the next 12 months. We'll go from 25 to 35. Yeah.
That's still a pretty big number.
It's huge for us. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you deal with that as a co-founder? You said first the question is, how many interviews do you actually do? You said a lot of interviews. How many interviews does somebody go through?
The primary person, you're right, I said a lot. That's a great point. I have no idea how many people do in other companies, but you'll interview with, you'll do kind of your initial screening interview, and then you'll probably interview with 3 to 4 more people in different roles, and then you'll go back and re-interview again. And sometimes, if we're still have questions or whatnot, we'll even do another interview after that. And what's super interesting is that doing that many interviews and kind of spreading it out over time, things come up. Like, we almost hired someone last week. And then we asked for references and to talk to references, and in that process he apparently reached out to some references, so we could reach out to them, and they offered him a job, and he took it, And I was like, whew. You know, I mean, if literally he was that eager just to take that job that had nothing to do with continuous improvement or software, well, I mean, you know, we're going to invest all this time and money and effort into having this person start adding value and then on a whim. So, better to be lucky than to be good.
How many weeks does that process take then? Isn't it like...
I mean, it can take 1 week if everything lines up, or it can take 2 to 3 weeks. I would say on average, it's probably 2 to 3 weeks. We've done things much shorter when someone basically says, "Hey, I've got another offer on the table, but I really want to do this." So we have accelerated, and just like people have cleared out schedules and, you know, made time on weekends to talk to people. So
how is that not too intense on your team? For instance, you guys are going to grow now with, let's say, 10 people. Isn't that so intense and not scalable?
Maybe maybe we should do another interview in a year, and I'll let you know. I don't know how else to do it. I'm sure when we're a 50-person company and we have someone that's in HR and kind of running the show, there'll be other ways to make that process more scalable. I don't know how important it is to make it scalable this year, but it is certainly a burden on the team. But I think the team appreciates it. I think when we're hiring an account manager, the fact that all the other account managers get to meet that person, I think that they feel more invested in the success of that person when they come, and they had a role to say, "Oh yeah, no, I remember when Lova was interviewing, and like I advocated for him in the debrief meetings, and I said, no, I really like this answer," and then all of a sudden, you know, their name and their reputation are now connected to you, and so they're going to make you successful, and so that's super important. So it's a great question.
I had an interview, I think it was 2 weeks ago, with Marty Kagan. He was the former head of product for eBay, and before that he was in Netscape and everything. He was telling me that one of the biggest mistakes that startups make is letting an HR person do recruitment. The chief of the department should be doing the recruitment. So I guess maybe that's why it's working for you. So I wouldn't recommend changing that.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great insight. Like that, you know, someone that has been in companies that have scaled that big. And that's what it feels like it should happen. Like, I mean, maybe an HR person could do some initial screening and kind of cull the numbers, but when the rubber meets the road, you're going to be working with this person fairly intimately. And so you need to like them. We've actually done a lot of work on implicit bias, because if you only hire people you like, well, you'll typically like people that look like you. And that's an interesting thing that we came across, because if you looked at our first 10 hires, they kind of all look like us. and then we, you know, someone that worked here, you know, kind of called us out on that. And we were like, oh my gosh, you're 100%. We didn't even realize we were doing it, right? You're 100% right. And so we started to learn about implicit bias, and we actually changed some of our processes. We changed some of our job descriptions and some of the initial kind of screenings and whatnot. But I think I'm glad you gave me that feedback about that prior interview.
What I find interesting is we have a completely different way of recruiting. So if I would count, like, for instance, like my team, and we do the same thing for volunteers for the event. And I think there we're like hitting like sometimes 50 volunteers or something like that. We have a fully automated recruitment. And I think the only real interview that happens is for interns only, I would say. So not even like employees or sometimes volunteers. No, I think, okay, yeah. So for the volunteers, interns, and employees that want to work with us, there's only 2 contact points. There's one at the beginning that is really short to answer any questions, because when they actually apply, there is like videos explaining everything. There are like, do you know how when you buy a product online, there are webinars and everything? We pretty much took a sales funnel and we applied it to recruitment. So our recruitment is literally only that first conversation to make them feel comfortable, make them feel like there's an actual person recruiting them. And that conversation usually lasts like 15 to 20 minutes. And then it's like 3 or 4 weeks of recruitment. And only at the end will they meet, well, in some cases, if it's like interns or something, they might have something in between a contact point. But at the end, they will meet me, for instance. And so what I noticed is for us, we would get, like, our recruitment is just blind to color and skill, not skill, like backgrounds and stuff like that. So we would get the most varied people that sometimes I'm looking at them and thinking, I'm not even sure I would recruit you if I would do an interview, but it's because I had the interview at the end and I saw all the results that I'd be like, holy shit, this person has the skill or the attitude that you mentioned.
That's super fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny because you're doing it with the interviews and then implicit bias training, but I'm doing the complete opposite, which is like as little contact as possible. Only at the end, when it matters, do we actually have contact to see if the person is actually the person that we've seen the results from in the past couple of weeks. Because they'd be doing like, personality tasks and stuff like that. Yeah. So
how does it work?
Yeah.
How has it worked?
Sorry?
How has that process worked?
So I remember initially when we jumped from 13 to 26, I mean, that was horrible. It was so bad that I think we imploded at one point, and then we had to build it back up, and now we're above that. And the reason we imploded is because we were very much still in the process. So we were thinking, oh, I have a good feeling with this person. I think the difference between me and you is I am not an ER doctor. I don't see people that many times, and I'm quite young as well. So my gut feeling doesn't mean anything. So we would meet people, and obviously, like 6 months down the line, you'd realize, oh, I really don't understand anything. I remember like having people go through the recruitment, and I think two or three people from senior management would be so excited to get this person on. And then in the last week of the recruitment, after we'd optimized it and everything, they would just show something that was such a red flag. But had this been before the very personal interviews and everything, they would have 100% been recruited. So as the company developed, we're now 7 years in, this recruitment has become quite airtight, I would say, except we still do iterate and do different, but it's just interesting that somehow we get to similar results but in completely different ways. You very personal, and we're kind of the least personal, the better the results for us. But I think maybe it's also the difference in leadership. I'm not an ER doctor, and I'm not so good at establishing who would be good or not. But because of that, I do notice that our results have been that we get very diversified people with us, like women, men, like every color, every like religion, whatever, and from all over the world. And I probably would have never even thought, like I had some preconceived notions about some regions. I'd be very scared hiring there because I heard so many stories of bad employees. And just when they go through recruitments, you just give them like a chance, and they usually smash it out of the park. So yeah.
Well, I would love to figure out, is there a hybrid of using both of them? And interesting. No,
Yeah, my hybrid was we went fully no contact at one point, and then so there was no last call, or like one of my recruitment managers was doing the last call, and so people would get hired without me actually having ever met them. And I noticed that that was a bad thing. So we had people quit, I think maybe like 6 months in or something like that. That's usually the cutoff point. Um, and I realized the reason why is because that last call was being done by somebody super nice. Like the recruitment manager is super nice. And I think the last call, like during COVID times, it's the call, usually it's the interview. But that needs to be really tough, like extremely tough. There are, I think, moments where I literally offer a job at one of our clients because they're usually like bigger names. And I'm like, hey, I can get you a job at this huge bank. And I've had a person literally once in an interview get up and be like, oh my God, I'd love a job there. And then I was just like, I was like, sure, send me a message. And then they walk out, never heard of them because I think they realized what they did. But so the last interview is important, I realized.
Yeah, no, absolutely interesting.
But yeah, sorry, I went off into recruitment is very fascinating, especially how you guys do it with all the personal interaction. Um, how involved are you with the recruitment versus like your co-founder? Is that something you guys have split up, or are you guys doing
So
that together?
yeah, the way Matt and I have split things up is he does finance, operations, HR, legal, development, and a lot of what I just said, he wears all those hats. So he does the finance, operations, legal, and development. It's more of a managerial, like the developers kind of manage themselves, if that make, between that and kind of a scrum master, and they don't, it's more just a check-in kind of scenario. And that's now a bottleneck. That's why we have an open position to help Matt out. And then what comes up through me is product, marketing, customer experience, sales. And so we have not yet hired somebody anywhere in the company that I have not spoken with. We probably hired some people that Matt has not spoken with. And that's mostly because we've hired more people in marketing, sales, customer experience, and product than we have on the other side. So that's kind of how we've divided that up. So
How do you do marketing and sales in your company? Obviously, you don't have a background, I'm assuming, in that. So how did you end up managing those positions?
I would say we do it very well, and I manage it very well. No,
But the question is how? Like,
yeah. It's really funny. I mean, for one, I think everyone sells a bit. So as an ER doctor, I have to sell kind of the plan, if that makes sense. Like, listen, and I have to figure out, okay, what kind of person is this? Am I going to be? I'm very anti being a paternalistic physician. I really am assuming the person has the capacity to engage in the decision making process. Then I very much want to make it a partnership, and me just being kind of the access to the medical information and give recommendations and kind of help give outcomes. And so there is some sales that goes into that, though, right? I mean, I have to sell that I'm credible, that the information I'm giving you is legit, and that's really what got me to the point where when we hired Jeff, and then I realized that to be really good at sales, it has to be your profession, and you have to study it. And so I have learned a ton from him. We have read a ton together. We have experimented a ton. But really, he came in with 15, 20 years of software enterprise sales experience. I think if you think you are going to do software enterprise sales without hiring someone that is seasoned in that, it's such a complex and long sales process. There's no question our size of our deals and the length of the time that it was taking. I didn't even know basic things like what a sales funnel was. I mean, I kind of inferred it. We were using Basecamp, if you can remember Basecamp and High Rise back then, and I had figured out like some way to like put like a number 1, 2, 3, 4 on the progression, and I just it's almost laughable. When he joined, I would say, "Oh yeah, sometimes people don't." He loves telling the stories. So I'll just beat him to the punch. Sometimes people don't show up to my meetings, and he goes, "Well, how are you doing it?" And I was like, "Oh well, I put the meeting on my calendar." And he goes, "Well, are you inviting the other person to the meeting?" And I was like, "No, is that what's done in corporate business world?" And I mean, that's the type of stuff, I was plowing through with grit and perseverance, and so there was a lot of that, and him bringing it to the table, kind of his prior knowledge to the table, but then us growing from there. We read a ton as an organization. He's an avid reader. I'm an avid reader, and then from the marketing side, we hired a guy who I call our marketing guru. I mean, he taught us the discipline of inbound marketing, and it's a discipline that we've been doing almost exclusively until the last several years, since 2014. There was an 18-month period also where I was not the CEO. Alan Wilson came in, who had the gray hair and had grown companies and sold his last one to SAP, and he taught me a ton about kind of the day-to-day and how to think through, and then at one point he said, my time here is done. I'm not adding value anymore, and I knew his time was never forever. That was agreed upon at the beginning, but he said, you're ready now to go back. And even preceding that, almost even before our founding days, there was another CEO that came in and kind of helped us with a business plan, a guy named Mike Muni, who was with Act Software back in the 90s, who helped us out. So that's one of the reasons that I get so excited. I love doing this, is because I love learning, and I love learning about the sales process and marketing, and there's just so much human psychology that goes into it. So that's how we do it. I mean, really, at this point, when you lead people, you're not the domain expert. You're just giving kind of intuition, and you're trying to get out of the person's way, and you're trying to clear the path for that person versus telling that person what to do on a day-to-day. You're just being a sounding board, and that was probably one of the biggest transitions of when you go from 10 to 20. You move out of doing into kind of coaching, and really advising, and I call myself the agitator. And so I'm always asking questions, and well, have we thought about this? And what do you think about this? And I just want to stir things up a little bit.
How would you say the things that you learned in sales, marketing, and this leadership, the CEO guy, clearly you've learned it from the people you've hired, which is so similar to how I learned my skills. I was hiring better people and literally shadowing them. Could you please elaborate practical examples within sales that maybe startups could be using in their business? The sales practical examples, marketing, and also the CEO leadership stuff that you learned. Well, not everything, of course, but like the best stuff that people could apply.
Well, I mean, I think the best stuff is, I mean, it's going to sound general what I'm about to say, but I think it's the most practical, because I'm sure there are people that are going to be listening that aren't software sales, that aren't enterprise, that are in different areas. And so my advice is going to be to read a ton. I think reading is probably the one habit that if you can do, whether it's a book a week or a book a month, it's something in that range. I think for me, I listen to books, and I listen to a ton of podcasts, and that has just only increased as time has gone on, and it's allowed me to advise. And then I think probably the second thing is listening, and active listening, and really paying attention to what people are saying, and understanding when what they're saying simply makes sense or what they're saying has internal inconsistencies. And then that would probably go into the third thing of just, the more you can develop your analytical skills, the better. To me, college I studied biology, but the reason why I think college helped prep me for this role is because I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and I studied a ton of biology, microbiology. It's one of the reasons why this pandemic has absolutely just fascinated me, because the amount of stuff to learn is endless. But it teaches you science. To be a scientist teaches you how to critically analyze data, and to infer patterns, and to kind of call BS when someone's saying something. You're like, yeah, it sounds good, but that's actually not what the data is saying. So let's keep going further. And so I think the combination of those three things are going to probably apply to more listeners than any kind of example I can give. I mean, if those are if you can really internalize, I love James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. I would first start with Do Higgs, The Power of Habit. If you can really become good at developing good habits and good disciplines on things that you know that are going to make you great. This year I've read The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, which is a horribly titled book. But if you could just rip off the title page and ignore that that's how the book is titled, but get into the book itself, I think it can be life transforming. And Never Split the Difference was a huge book from 2 years ago that we've incorporated into a lot of our day to day. So,
what did you learn from that one?
Tactical empathy.
What does that mean?
Tactical empathy is just the ability to connect with people and to understand that all negotiation is emotionally driven, and the only way to find common ground is to connect with people, and to use empathy in a way that influences the outcome, not manipulate. I'm specifically not using that word because I manipulate, I think, infers a negative connotation, but to influence other people's thoughts, allow other people's thoughts to influence your thoughts. It's ultimately what this world needs a shit ton more of right now. If I can be really blunt.
Yeah, I agree. I'm still gonna dig deeper though. I do agree with the advice, very general, but still focusing on your case, because you hired incredible people. So what did you learn, like, really practically for SaaS, within sales, marketing, and as a CEO? Very specific to your case, the most practical things. I learned from stories. So if you have stories, please share them.
So I think I learned that from a sales side of things, I thought that a sales transaction would work something like this. Hey, Lova, it sounds like you're really interested in continuous improvement. It's pretty obvious that you're going to need some leadership behaviors. Don't you agree? Yep. Okay, look, you need a methodology. Cool. Great. So now let me show you why our technology solves those things. Do you agree? Okay, yes. Great. Here's the contract. Can you sign here? And what I now understand is that a complex enterprise sales is a huge number of tiny yeses. That everyone thinks, oh, if I could somehow just get to the CEO, that we'll get the deal. That's actually not how it works. It's certainly very nice getting to the CEO. But what the CEO is then going to do is she's going to then go to her team and say, hey, I heard about this thing KaiNexus. What do we think here, right? So you're going to have to figure out who are the influencers, who are the naysayers. You're going to have to understand what are all the potential blockers in the situation. It's an incredibly complex process, and you're going to have to make an emotional connection with who you're selling the solution to. And so the realization that it's far more nuanced and elegant actually makes it more interesting than just me trying to convince you we have the best technology out there. Is that a fair, practical kind of?
Yeah, that's definitely good. Do you have one for marketing as well?
So, I mean, marketing, we are a big inbound marketing shop. I mean, we read inbound marketing from the founders of HubSpot. We're a very mission-driven organization, and we really deeply believe our mission here is to spread continuous improvement. And so we spend a lot of effort in webinars, in content, in ebooks that truly people can derive value from those things if they never use KaiNexus. And we are very pro that. Like that makes me extremely happy if people utilize things that we produce and it helps spread continuous improvement in their lives, in their company, in their organization. Then that's great. I have only positive feelings from that. And that is a discipline that you can't do for 1 week or for 1 month or even for 1 year. And it's something that we have been working on now for 7 years. I mean, we have just a huge amount of content that is promoting our mission to spread continuous improvement. And it's ultimately resulted in lots of people reaching out to us if and when they're ready to use the best technology to help them develop that culture of continuous improvement. It has had plenty of financial benefits to the company, but it's actually not the reason why we do it.
The inbound marketing idea, it sounds very fascinating, but I keep hearing from startups at the beginning stages it's very expensive, and when do you really see a result? So I'd love to hear from you. Is it expensive, and when did you start seeing results from your inbound marketing, and do you have a story about that?
I guess expense is either measured in time or in money. And so I don't think it's expensive in money at all. I think it's expensive in time. We spent less than $50,000 on getting a website, learning the discipline, and everything in between. So if you have $100,000, I think you can't do that, but I think you could probably learn 50% of or 80% of what we did through books and blog sites. You're not going to see results for a minimum of 18 months based on our data. Minimum. And then it will take you to a point, and then you will have to start doing other things because at a point it produced as much as it was going to produce. And so you have to start adding in other forms of marketing. That was our experience. I have no idea if other people have different experiences.
When do you know it hits a certain point? How did you decide that?
Metrics, our tier ones and SQLs started to plane out. Our organic traffic started to plane out. I mean, I'm assuming everyone got hurt by the Google algorithm changes a couple years ago. It definitely affected us. We've rebounded, but we haven't rebounded to the prior trajectories that we were on. So
yeah,
I think that you have to be measuring data. If you're not measuring data, then it'd be like driving without looking at the windshield.
Do you have a story of a client coming from inbound marketing that you never expected to happen?
All of our clients.
Can you give an example?
I mean, 90+% of our customers reach out to us through our website, and we've never spoken with them. We've never had any interaction with them. We have, you can go to the customer page. We have customers in every segment in every industry that it's mind-boggling. I don't even know half the names of the companies that reach out to us, and I'll get an update and I'll look and, oh, this company has 10,000 employees. They build these widgets that I didn't even know anyone built. It's just amazing. So we certainly have had referrals. That's another major source, and we've certainly made some initial contacts at conferences. But the vast majority of people that reach out to us have come to us through our website.
Do you have a practical story from that CEO that you hired that really it changed the way you lead?
I'm going to give a really practical one because I know you want practical. So he did lots, but I'll give two things that are disciplines that we have kept up with, and that I think that are wonderful disciplines. We do a 9 a.m. stand-up on Fridays because of him.
Well, what's that?
Where we all, as an entire company, we're still able to do it even though we have 25 people now on there. We all get together. Now it's through Zoom. When we were in the offices, we have an office in Dallas, one in Austin. We would all, in our respective offices with the Zoom between, get together. I like to muse. My musing is usually not business related. It's usually about observations. I love Seth Godin. I love James Clear. Sometimes I riff on things that they've written. I subscribe to this Buddhist little saying thing. Sometimes I riff on those, but sometimes I riff on a patient that I had. But I typically muse. I mean, life is not only about business and about dollars and cents. So we might talk about habits. Anyway, so I muse. We didn't call it musing. I just initially just kind of started, but like, hey, this is what I've been thinking about. And then the team was like, oh, give us your muse. We practice gratitude. So that's, I think, a very important thing. We open up the floor. You are allowed to be grateful for anything except for work. This isn't like a, kumbaya. This is, topics other than work. If you want to be grateful for people at work, then you can do a shout out like, hey, Lova totally helped me out of a bind on Wednesday when blah, blah. That's a shout out. That's not being grateful. That's just kind of what we do, and then everyone just gives a little snippet of what did they accomplish this week? What did they learn? What are they going to do next week? It just gives us insight into what people are doing. Like, what the hell is marketing doing all week? And what did the developers work on this week? And so that has turned into something, it's a really intensely important part of our week. It also kind of completes the week. And then we usually, about 50% of the time, allow the joke to come out that, why doesn't everyone take the next couple of days off? And then the other thing we do is we do a monthly management meeting. We actually sit down, the senior leaders. Initially, it included some very specific investors that had kind of the super angels, if you will. And we write down the metrics. We think about the kind of the longer term metrics, and we talk through them. And it just kind of creates a discipline of like making sure this happens every month to look at. And so those are two practical things. He taught me tons, but trying to keep them practical. So.
Yeah, those are very practical. I love it. I definitely wanted to ask about your career before the startup. So you being an ER doctor, I guess the question is why? That's such an intense job. How come you wanted to do that?
Oh yeah, no, that's actually super simple. So I grew up with a family of entrepreneurs. We didn't call them entrepreneurs in the 80s. I'm not going to forgive you for your little swipe of, well, I'm younger than you. I was like, well, how old do you think I am? But you didn't think you were going to get away with that, did you? And
Well, I didn't get away with it now.
so was it the wrinkles? No. So
I have the same wrinkles, I think. So.
I'm just messing. So I grew up, and so they were small business, but now we would call them entrepreneurs. And I realized, ironically, I was like, well, I don't want to have a business. Like, and really, when you become a doctor, you develop a practice, and you have to have an office, and most doctors are actually operating a small business, at least in the United States.
Yeah, of course.
And so I kind of went in it with that mentality, and then I loved procedures, but I didn't really groove on my patients being asleep. Like, I'm a people person at the heart of it. So like, I like to interact with people. Like, I want the person to be like, I love the problem solving nature. I love getting to the diagnosis. And a lot of that actually is uncovered in the history. If you can just ask the right question or get the right amount of information, half the time you can figure out the answer that way. And then my first or second year of med school was like a party or something, and we were all hanging out in a hot tub. And there was a guy in there who said he was an ER doctor and he made a nice living, and he worked 14 shifts a month. And I was like, whoa, wait, stop, hold on. You're saying that in your group you can be a full-time ER doctor and work 14 shifts a month? And he was like, yep. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
How many hours is a shift?
Well, a shift, it can be anywhere between 8 to 12 hours. And so now you are going to have some time outside of your shift that you're going to work. There's going to be some meetings. Some of your shifts are going to be in the evenings, weekends, nights. So you'll have some recovery time. But a full-time ER doctor, not infrequently, will be between 110 to 140 hours a month, clinical hours. Now, certainly, if you want to work 18, 20 shifts a month, you can. And oftentimes, right out of school, people do because they want to, pay for a new car and get some catch up on their loans and stuff. But yeah, so that was the idea. And at that point, I had already started to invest in real estate, and so I had already had this kind of side gig, and so I was like, well, this is perfect. I could be a part-time ER doctor. Could do my real estate, I can do traveling, and so that was it. And so it was simple.
Why do you still do it?
That's a good question.
Because I mean, at this point, you're a successful. I mean, I'm sorry, but you are a successful tech entrepreneur. Why still be an ER doctor?
I really enjoy it. I love the connection to humans and having patients and going in and relieving, giving someone an answer, relieving some suffering. It's intellectually super challenging, just to keep up with all the information, to figure people out, to figure out how you're going to navigate. Like, I'll give you a great example. Like, so I did a shift yesterday. So I do this. I found an ER. It's a low volume ER. I can do a 24-hour shift. So 2 shifts a month. I do an 8P to 8P shift. It's called a reverse 24. So I go in at night, and then at one point I'll sleep, and then I'll do the full day, and then I go home. And I found for my circadian rhythm, that's like the thing that worked for me. So I go into a room, and it's this guy in his 50s, and he's there for suicidal ideation. He says he wants to kill himself.
Okay.
And so, like, I'm interacting with him, and his pulse is pretty high. Pulse is 120. He says that he lost a job yesterday. We kind of figured out that he was at another ER, and they cleared him. And he's estranged from his family. He has no family. And so, like, I'm kind of unwinding this story. It's interesting because this is an ER that typically doesn't see psych patients. because I told you it's this low volume kind of situation. It's called a freestanding ER. I'm in an old Blockbuster. That's what I love telling people. Do you remember Blockbusters?
Yeah.
So like I'm literally practicing medicine in a strip mall. It's something that's happened in the U.S. where there's freestanding ERs, and I'm kind of uncovering it. And it was one of the first times that I said, he asked if he could take his mask off, and I'm fully vaccinated now, and I was like, I felt like I was going to get a better read on him. It was literally the only time in the pandemic where I was like, yeah, you can take your mask off. I'm cool with that. And so I'm like, really engaging with him. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have to go down this pretty invasive situation where we have to get, blood work and kind of go through this rigmarole and figure out a psychiatric place for him to go to. And in Austin, Texas, we call these, they're police, they're called mental health officers. They have some training, and they go to kind of psychiatric crisis kind of situations and help determine kind of the best treatment for him. But guy comes in, this officer, and he's like, "Oh, Mr. Smith, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Whoa!" So come to find out, like that's what this guy's routine is. And he says he's suicidal all the time. I mean, this one mental health officer has seen him several dozen times. He's very connected into all the resources in Austin. There's a mobile crisis unit that goes to his house and frequents his house. And so that's fascinating to me. I mean, that is just the whole, the investigation and like the human psyche. And of course, like there's deep sadness to that. I mean, this is a person in pain, and who has an alcohol problem, but that's real, and me living in my, white, educated, upper middle class, well-to-do, life, that's not real. I mean, it's real for me, but it's one slice of what's going on in this world. And
so it's your exposure to all facets of life, of our society.
Yes, that's a great. Yeah, it's like the depth of how beautiful life is and how beautiful humanity is, and also how deeply flawed and how sad it is, and being able to kind of navigate that and appreciate beauty and sadness, kind of almost instantaneously. I mean, in a weird way, this guy kind of lightened up when "Oh, officer so-and-so, how's it going?" Like there were like, it's like, it's bizarre. There's no other way to describe it. And that's our world. And so, we are an interesting species.
Do you watch House? Or like it's not anymore, but did you watch it?
Yeah, no, I watch very little Netflix and TV and whatnot. Now back in the day when I wasn't doing as much KaiNexus, because now I'm managing, KaiNexus, and we have a daughter, and I have a beautiful daughter and lovely wife, and real estate. I don't have time. But the one thing that I did watch a lot of medically related was Scrubs. In a weird way, that is the most accurate medical show of any of the shows that I watch. But I probably haven't watched a full episode of House.
Interesting. What is the most I would say maybe life-changing, or a story that you've learned the most from, that you could share with us from the ER?
You couldn't have prepped me for that question?
Sorry. It just popped up because you shared that story with the guy. So
I don't know if people realize how raw these interviews are. Like you're like, "Oh, there's not going to be any prep here. We're just going to go talk." And I think that's pretty awesome.
I always say to people, obviously we have a get to know call. A lot of people don't know that, but it's literally what pops up, and I said that to you in the conversation, like it's as if we're in a bar and we're talking, and you just told me a fascinating story about you in the ER, So I'm very fascinated with my beer, except I have water here. Um, like, tell me, please, another story. I want to know.
Um, it's funny. My wife's an ER doctor too, and she's a phenomenal writer. Um, and I always ask her because she practices more than I do, and she'll come home and she'll tell me about a patient. Um, and I always say, oh, if you should just like write that down in a little vignette, yeah, and you'll have 50 or 100 of them, and it'll encapsulate this slice of humanity. I don't even know how to answer that.
How about what's a story that you've learned from being an ER doctor that really helped you become an entrepreneur or make that journey easier? Maybe you met someone or
I can tell you funny stories.
yeah, tell me funny stories then.
But you're gonna think I'm crass with this story.
I love funny stories.
Yeah. So probably one of my funniest stories was, and of course, if you're talking to an ER doctor about funny ER stories, rectal stories are gonna come up. So that's just how we think. Probably the funniest story I had was on Christmas Day. I had a guy come in his 40s, and it would have been about 7:30 in the morning, and he was pleasuring himself with a vibrator, and it got stuck in him in the on position, and you could literally hear it in the on position. That was probably one of my funniest stories.
But wait, so then he was sitting in the waiting room until you got to him?
It happened to be that he got brought back right away, but like you walked into the room and you heard, and of course I always start with the same question. I said, "Oh, what brings you in today?" And I do that because it's an open-ended question, because whatever's on the triage may not be what really brought him in. And of course, he was sitting there and he turned around. He's like, "Are you serious?" And I had to maintain a straight face and say, "Yes, I'm serious."
You maintained a straight face? You didn't laugh?
No, I would not laugh. So I think that the lesson there is there are certain toys that are designed for that sort of thing, and you need to make sure that you use the right designed ones. So that's a funny story. He said we're having a funny story over a beer. I could go down the entire foreign body story with all the accompanying pictures, but that's probably not what we're talking about.
I feel like when your wife finishes her book, she should come on the podcast, tell some stories. So I guess I had a last question as we're starting to wrap up now. I wanted to know is especially around stress, maybe, because I'm hearing you tell these stories as an ER doctor, how the company has grown and everything. Do you feel like the stress of entrepreneurship is more or less than what you experienced as an ER doctor?
It's a different kind of stress. There is definitely a palpable stress when you are seeing someone that's critically ill and is dying, and you have to do some interventions. In the next minute, 10 minutes, hour, that's going to change that trajectory. And what's interesting is the more you're in that environment, the less stressful it gets. So if you work in an ER that sees that sort of thing all the time, like I've worked in those ERs, it's actually not stressful at all because very algorithmic and you just kind of like plugging and chugging through. But when you're in an ER that doesn't see those sorts of things a lot, that's very stressful. I can remember I had a patient who came in with abdominal pain, and she didn't communicate that she was pregnant. I don't know if she didn't know she was pregnant or she was having some psychiatric kind of denial. But she was basically in preterm labor. and she was giving birth. I mean, her abdominal pain was giving birth, and that was a highly stressful situation, because I was not in an ER that was prepared for that sort of thing. Didn't have the right backup. That was kind of getting back to one of my most intense stories, going from the Christmas story, and that baby,
Christmas story. I like how you call it a Christmas story.
Yeah, but that baby came out premature and ultimately died, and that was highly stressful for me. That's actually the story that I remembered and paused. If you go back, I paused there for a second. That is not the typical life of an ER doctor. You have certain, you might have several dozen cases of those, but if you're working in really places that see that kind of, you learn how to what are all the resources, what are the algorithms. It becomes second nature. When I was working in a trauma center, traumas were not stressful because you had a whole team and the person was in the right place and they were going to get the right care that they needed. A really sick trauma in a very remote ER is a very stressful situation, because you're everything and that you don't have the resources they need. There's typically an answer in medicine, right? I mean, there's when you make it into med school, it's do this work, answer these questions, you're going to get out. Figure out what kind of doctor you want to be. There's an answer on how to be a pediatrician, on how to be an emergency medicine doctor. There are well-defined paths. So the stress is different, right? It's okay, fine. Yes, it's stressful to develop a practice, but really there are hundreds of thousands of practices that have occurred in the United States, and you could just go ask, another ENT doctor or another plastics doctor or another give me the blueprints of what to do. I would contrast that with starting a company. Starting a company has been by far the most physically, emotionally, and intellectually difficult thing that I've done ever. And I say that because physically, right? I mean, there is no end to the work.
True.
There's literally no end. I mean, you could work 24/7 and you still wouldn't get all the things done that would need to get done. So emotionally, you have to get to a point where you have to figure out where's your life balance. Because if you don't, you'll burn out. I have teetered on unhealthy places and healthy places of that. My wife wrote me an email 5 years ago when I was in an unhealthy place. And that's an email I have recur every 90 days in my inbox, and I reread it just to remind myself about that. And then intellectually challenging because I don't have any sales experience, so I had to learn all that. I don't have any marketing experience, so I had to learn all that, right? I don't have any customer experience, so I had to learn all that. And guess what? Just because it worked at another company doesn't mean it's going to work at your company with your customers and the problem you're trying to solve. So you have to learn what you can extrapolate, but then you have to get into the moment and figure out what do you think the right answer is in your situation. And there isn't a single person that has the answer for you. There are people that can come and like replicate what they've done, and it may or may not work. I mean, maybe what they've done at other places has an 80% chance of success, so they apply it to your situation. It just happens to be on the 80% side and it worked, but it could be 20% that doesn't work. So because of the physical, emotional, and intellectual challenges, it's a completely different kind of stress than an emergency medicine doctor. That's not to say that being an ER doctor or being any other kind of doctor isn't. I mean, there's the amount of alcohol abuse in those professions are very high for a specific reason, because they're inherently stressful activities. But I'm doing this, one, because this is the most challenging thing I've ever done. Two, because I think I'm making the world a better place. And now three, because I really love my team. I mean, if it wasn't for my team at this point, I'd be like, well, give me a check, like, but like, I just love the people I work with. I really do. They're so smart and they're funny and they're engaged and they keep me going, and we're having a great time.
Maybe a more personal question then. Do you feel like when somebody leaves the company, it's almost like they're leaving you or something like that? How do you deal with that?
Not well.
Have you gotten better at it?
Well, so there's, I think I'll divide it into, there have been people that have left the company where I feel like, oh, they want something we simply don't provide. I mean, we had a developer leave that wanted to be a musician. Well, making music I can't see how that's going to be part of the business model at KaiNexus. And then we had someone else that was a finance person that wanted to become a developer. I can't, like, you need to go back to school for that. And then if, maybe we'll rehire you at that point. And then there are people that have left for very similar roles in other organizations. And they always say, oh, it's not you, it's me. But the bottom line is it's you. I mean, you were part of that reason. And so those have been intense. And I know that as we go on and we have 30 people and 50 people and 100 people, and as the company gets bigger and bigger, I'm going to have either one, less emotional connection with every single person, just because you can only have so many emotional connections. But then two, I'm going to have gone through it more. But the first couple of those were deeply troubling to me. And I have another email that I recur in my inbox, where one of my team sent me an email and said, I know this is really hard on you, and I just want to let you know that you're an amazing leader, and don't forget that. And that's something that I recur in my inbox and I read, because you should be reminded of those things as well. So
I feel like if we're looking at practical tips on how you lead, it's almost like you're trying to remind yourself to keep that humble mindset, but also positive mindset almost. And I feel like then the ER job that you're still doing also gives you context as to, I guess, how lucky you are to be where you are. It seems very interesting, because in the beginning I was like, how do you combine a different job with a tech business? But it seems like it's pretty much just challenging you intellectually, or maybe even taking you away from all the craziness from a startup and putting you into the craziness of life, and then understanding somehow, giving you just context.
Yeah. No, I think I think you may have come up with something. There's also and I'm not opportunity cost, sunk cost, the sunk cost fallacy. I don't think I'm doing it, but one could say, oh, well, you're just doing the sunk cost fallacy when I say this. But I've studied for so long to be able to do this that I don't want to stop doing it, but I enjoy doing it. So I think if I didn't enjoy doing it and I was just doing it because, well, you studied for so long, then I think it would be sunk cost fallacy. But right now there is definitely an element of, I'm good at it, I enjoy it, it provides me satisfaction, and I don't have to do it a ton. I mean, ER doctors definitely burn out. When you do 18, 20 shifts a month for forever, you become a not empathetic and not compassionate person. Many people do, not everyone. I'm sure there are people that have the capacity to do that. But
have you ever had the thought, I really want to ask these questions before we wrap up, but have you ever had the thought that I have this skill as a doctor, especially ER doctor, I think is very valuable. And I now have this business as a tech entrepreneur. How about I build my own hospital or something that is ultra efficient?
No, the business of medicine is just not interesting to me at all. Yeah.
How come tech attracts you and the health business doesn't?
Health business in the United States is so bizarre. I equate it to imagine if the business model was you could just go into the Apple store and just take whatever you wanted, and then they'll send you a bill 2-3 months later. They're like the fact that there's no price transparency. The
Oh,
fact
like
that
that.
the business is related to people's health. Um, Someone has to do it. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done. I'm just saying I don't want to occupy my life thinking through that. So I like that I can go into a room and I can engage in, um, to a certain degree, altruistic behavior. Now I'm getting paid for it. And I mean, ER doctors are paid well. So I'm not saying that this is volunteer work. But I like that. I can just have that interaction and it's decoupled, and then someone puts some money in my bank once a month. And I don't need to know about kind of all the fights with the insurance companies and all the. It's a very complicated business.
Yeah, sounds pretty bad. I feel like another podcast needs to be dedicated to that. I'm. I guess the last question I have for you is if you look back at everything we've discussed, your career, how you started from, selling in college, your ER experience, your business experience now, what would be some life lessons you'd be giving to new entrepreneurs?
You better be passionate about the problem that you're trying to solve. If you don't deeply care about it, you will quit at a time when you should have kept going. There was a period of time where I was looking at myself in the mirror thinking, what the hell have I been doing? But because I intensely felt that the work was valuable, I kept going. I would not have been able to do this without a co-founder. I think if you're doing this without a partner in crime, you should give pause. And then I would not have been able to do this also without a supporting wife. Because there was a long period of time where I was either making very little money, or for years I was making no money. And if your wife is like, I'm sorry, you can go be a full-time ER doctor and make good money, and we could retire earlier, or we could travel more, or we could donate more of the money. I mean, whatever we wanted to do with that, but instead you're doing something risky and that may not have an outcome. I could have seen her taking a very different approach, and she never strayed from supporting, like, hey, this is how you want to do it and how you want to spend your time. Not having a supporting partner. I think those are the three things I would. Is that the question? Like, what are the three? Yeah, those would be three things. I think if those three things aren't sorted, they will. You're going to crash and burn. Outside of not being able to, solve the problem. So,
I have to agree. If you don't have a relationship, a supporting partner, it's like you can do it, but it's just gonna be horrible. I don't have a co-founder, and I remember 3 or 4 years in, I really desperately was looking for a co-founder, just couldn't find anybody who I was vibing with. Thank God for my girlfriend, honestly. I'm not even religious. But no, that's I really love that. It's a really positive note to close on. I'd love to roll out the red carpet for you. Do you have anything to promote? Tell anything about your company, where people can find you. Tell the listeners everything.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Can I do two things?
Yeah, of course.
So I've gotten super interested in the pandemic over the last year, and it went from writing emails to friends and family to ultimately a blog. And I have no idea what I'm going to do with this blog once the pandemic is, I think, hopefully, at least in the U.S., I'm crossing my fingers, where more of it's behind us than in front of us, if these variants are okay. But it's called Letters to Humans. So just LETTERS TO humans, HUMANS.com. And if you find any of those writings interesting, you can subscribe. I will never try to market anything to you. It's literally me just trying to explain science. And a lot of people have found it valuable. Probably more importantly, if you're in an organization that has the desire to develop a culture of continuous improvement, that recognizes that people that are doing the work are the most important people, one, at the organization, but then two, that have the ability to improve the work, that are doing Lean, Six Sigma, Kaizen, that are doing A3s, PDSA, that are struggling to get leaders engaged or have leaders engaged in this process, and are struggling with developing a methodology or have a methodology, but that it's not scalable. You should at least know we exist. You should at least take a look at our technology and see if we can be of help. We pride ourselves in having a sales process that's very collaborative. We tell people as often we do not think we're the right technology for you, then say, hey, I think we could help. And so please check us out. KaiNexus.com, KAINEXUS.com.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna have that in the title. So I loved it. I loved hearing your story, and also combining your passion for people with a tech business. And I've learned a ton. I wish we could have talked another 2 hours about Letters to Humans. The pandemic fascinates me as well, and also the psychological effects of everything. It's just nobody knows what it's gonna do. Had so many questions also about the vaccines and everything, but that's not what the podcast is about. But maybe on the next episode, if you want to come on somewhere in the future, it'd be fun to have you. Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully see you on the next one.
That sounds great. This has been an absolute pleasure. When you said, "Oh no, it's long form. We're just gonna have a chat, and it might be 2 hours," I was thinking, "Oh my, what are we gonna talk about for 2 hours?" But this time has just completely flown by. I hope some of my stories help people with their entrepreneurial goals and what they're doing. So thank you so much for having me on.
Worst case, think about the Christmas story. If you like this episode, you can check out our most recent one here. And if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group, where you can find thousands of like-minded people, and you get direct access and support to any business question from the entire startup funding